Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Thursday, June 27th. Hopefully, everybody is having a good day so far today. It is episode 319 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. Today, we're going to get into New York Jets records that could be broken this season. Wrote an article on it yesterday. I will link that article in the description down below. And I want to break down, elaborate a little bit more on some of the records that I chose that could be broken this year, the realistic records that could be broken this season for the New York Jets as we enter a 2024 campaign with high expectations, high excitement levels, and of course, one of the most talented rosters we have seen put together on paper in this organization in history. One of the most talented rosters on paper we have seen with potential for big things to come this season. It's almost the end of June, almost into July, just a couple weeks away from the start of training camp, about a month, I should say, away from the start of training camp. Which is always exciting. Once training camp rolls around, we'll have player previews, episodes almost daily, pretty much, recapping every single practice, all that good stuff. So we're almost out of this dead period in the NFL, really the only dead period of the NFL league year before training camp begins here very soon. Now, before we begin today's show, I want to let you know about our podcast sponsor, Huga House. Click the link in the description down below. That will take you to the Huga House store, and you can shop from a wide range of vintage-inspired hats. The hat that I'm wearing right now you can get, or you can get your hands on the hats that have been seen on Aaron Rodgers from time to time, and Shohei Ohtani. Tons and tons of celebrities, athletes have been wearing Huga House hats, myself included. If you like the hat I'm wearing, any of the hats that Aaron Rodgers wearing, or any of the other hats that Huga House sells, click at the link in the description down below. Head on over to the Huga House store, and at checkout, use promo code BUBS for 15% off your purchase. Get yourself some swag. Get yourself some of the swag that I'm rocking right now, that Aaron Rodgers rocks, that Shohei Ohtani rocks, and many other athletes and celebrities that have worn the Huga House hat. So head on over there, use promo code BUBS for 15% off your purchase. All right, now let's get into today's show. Want to break down some records that could be broken this season. And I'll tell you what, I was writing an article on this. Again, the article got published yesterday. I'll put the link in the description down below so you can hear some more of my thoughts on the article on each of these records that I chose. And it's funny because last year, you headed into the season last year and the conversation was there's going to be a ton of records broken. Pretty much every single passing record you can think of was going to be broken with Aaron Rodgers taking over the reins at quarterback. Unfortunately, of course, as we all know, 4 snaps into the season, he goes down, and it was another one of those seasons that was terrible quarterback play, great defense, no quarterback, Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian, all that garbage. None of the records even got touched, didn't even get close to being broken. You enter into this season, and it's the same conversation again, taking a look at some records, mainly the offensive records, because of the expectations for this team on offense and what Aaron Rodgers, what Garrett Wilson, what these guys can do this year on offense, and what potential records we could see get broken. So Jets passing records, which we've talked about on the show before, and you don't have to be you don't really have to know much other than knowing that the New York Jets passing records are not that great. And that's not much of a surprise. I mean, they are pretty easy even if Aaron Rodgers is 75 to 80% of what he has been in his career. He doesn't have to be MVP Aaron Rodgers this season. He can be 75 to 80% of what Aaron Rodgers has been through his 19-year career. And there's a good chance he probably breaks not 1, 2, but probably even 3 potential passing records that are currently held in Jets history by 2 quarterbacks that are kind of in Jets history, and 1 quarterback that, of course, is a Hall of Famer. So we'll start with passing yards. This is a record that I think Aaron Rodgers could beat. It's currently held by Joe Namath, who, by the way, this is actually a very impressive number. While it's a little embarrassing that nobody has surpassed it, because this record's been held since 1967, and in the modern day NFL, we've seen many quarterbacks surpass this record many times. Aaron Rodgers would have beaten this record many times if he was on the Jets if his Green Bay Packers days were on the Jets. He would have beaten this record many times. Now, what's impressive about this record, though, is the time it happened, and that is Joe Namath's passing record right now in Jets history of 4,007 yards, which he did in 1967. Throwing for over 4,000 yards in the 1960s in a much different game was very impressive for back then, but for it to be held for 56 years is not great. And the fact that there has not been a single Jet quarterback. Joe Namath is the only Jet quarterback in history to surpass 4,000 passing yards in a season, which is pretty, look, it's pretty embarrassing. I'll tell you that. It shows you all you need to know. The Jets have not had very good quarterback play. Now, the closest to beating this record was Ryan Fitzpatrick in 2015, when the journeyman threw for 3,905 yards that year. So right now, Joe Namath won. That has been held since 1967. And in second place is Ryan Fitzpatrick, who threw for 3,905 yards, as we know, in that 2015 campaign, which was kind of a one-hit wonder with Fitzpatrick, and really the year that coined him the nickname Fitzmagic. Now, as for Rodgers, this is a record that he would have beaten many times. In his 19-year NFL career, 10 of the 19 seasons that Aaron Rodgers has played in, he has surpassed 4,000 yards. The best season in his career in terms of yards came in 2011, which is a while ago. He threw for 4,643 yards. Most recently, he threw for 4,000 in 2021. This was his last year throwing for over 4,000 yards. 2021, he threw for 4,115 yards, 37 touchdowns, 4 picks. Now, 2022, his last year in Green Bay, he, of course, was dealing with the thumb injury, was playing hurt. He only threw for 3,695 yards. But prior to that, 2021, 2020, 2019, 2018, he had 4 straight years of throwing for over 4,000 yards. 3 of those 4 years would have beat Namath's record. 2019 wouldn't have. He only threw for 4,002 yards in 2019. However, now with the 17-game schedule, if 2019 was a 17-game schedule, he probably would have beaten that record by a pretty good margin. So this is a record I think Rodgers should be able to beat, even if the New York Jets go with a more run-heavy offense this year, which you expect them to do that out of the gate. Rodgers is going to find a way to put up yards. I think passing yards, when it comes to a Jets record perspective, Rodgers has done this 10 times in his career. 10 different seasons he's thrown for over 4,000 yards, more than half of the years that he's been in the league. And let's be honest here, too. The first 3 years of his career, he was sitting behind Favre. Then you had last year where he got hurt. So really, if you remove those 4 seasons, it's really 10 different seasons in 15 years if you remove the first 3 years of his career where he wasn't the starter. And then if you remove last year where he only played 4 snaps, it's really 10 years in a 15-year career where he's thrown for over 4,000 yards. Even if this guy isn't at 100%, even if he's not the 2020 Aaron Rodgers MVP, 48 touchdown, 5 interception player, which we don't need him to be that, this is still probably a guy that's going to go off for well over 4,000 yards. So I think passing yards is definitely a record that Aaron Rodgers could beat, should beat. And let's be honest here, Joe Namath is great, all-time great. He's a name that you're definitely okay with seeing up there. But Ryan Fitzpatrick, I mean, I think you would like to see that name drop down a peg. I don't know if it's not a great look to see Ryan Fitzpatrick be second all time on the passing yards list. Joe Namath, yes, all time great, only quarterback to win a Super Bowl. But Fitzpatrick's name up there, it's not a great look. Let's bump him down a little bit. So Rodgers will say passing yards. Second record that'll be broke or could be broke, passing touchdowns. You can make the case this might be the most breakable for Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. You could also make the case the next record that I'll bring up is very breakable. But passing touchdowns right now, it's held by Ryan Fitzpatrick. He had 31 touchdowns in 2015. The second all-time is Vinny Testaverde, who had 29 touchdowns in that 1998 season. And then after that, it's a three-way tie between Namath, Sanchez, Al Duro. All those guys had 26 touchdowns. Namath in that 67 season, Mark Sanchez in 2011, and Al Duro in 1960, which was the first year when the Jets were the Titans. Now, it's crazy. Fitzpatrick, to put in perspective what we've endured since that 15 season with Ryan Fitzpatrick, the closest to beating Ryan Fitzpatrick's 31 touchdown record since 2015 was Sam Darnold, who threw for 19 touchdowns rather in 2019. That's the closest. We have not seen a quarterback in almost a decade throw for over 20 touchdown passes in a season. Sam Darnold was the closest. He had 19, which ranks 14th best in Jets history. So that's all you need to know about the terrible quarterback play that this organization's had. Rodgers should at least find himself at number 3 on this list. He should have over 26 touchdowns at least this year. And I think there's a good chance he could surpass 30. When you look at what Rodgers has done in his career, he's had 30-plus touchdown passes in 8 different seasons. So similar to the yards, we've seen plenty of years where Aaron Rodgers has thrown for well over 30-plus touchdowns. In those 8 years, 3 of them saw Aaron Rodgers throw for 40-plus touchdown passes. And to put in perspective, the Jets' touchdown passing records compared to what Rodgers has done, if Rodgers, let's say, was with the Jets during his time in Green Bay, let's just say Rodgers' 18-year career, let's say it was reversed. Let's say Rodgers was on the Jets for the first 18 years of his career, then he went to Green Bay, right? Let's just say, or whatever. Rodgers would then hold the first 7 spots in Jets history if he played here for his entire career. So rank 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, who currently belong to Fitzpatrick, Testaverde, Namath, Sanchez, Duro, O'Brien, and O'Brien, 6 and 7, and 85 and 86, with 25 touchdowns in each of those seasons. Rodgers would have all 7 of those spots. He would own the top 10. So that just puts in perspective. Again, even if Rodgers is 75, 80%, this is a guy that can easily hit 30-plus touchdowns this year. We don't need him to throw 48. That would be great. But this is a guy that could probably hit 32, 33, break Fitzpatrick's record, maybe even hit 36, 37, potentially. But even if he doesn't, you're probably looking at anywhere from 30 to 33, 34. I mean, the guy's one of the most talented quarterbacks of all time. Rodgers should have, if he's healthy and plays all 17 games, he should have a pretty good chance of doing that. And that's another thing, too, to put in perspective. 17 games, right? Rodgers, previously, you look at it, a lot of these were 16-game seasons. Rodgers will have an extra game this year as well, full 17-game slate to throw 30-plus touchdowns. So this is another record. Passing touchdowns hopefully belongs to Aaron Rodgers at the end of the year because, look, nothing against Ryan Fitzpatrick, but I mean, come on now. Having Ryan Fitzpatrick as your touchdown passing leader in a single season in Jets history is a pretty bad look. If Aaron Rodgers is up there, that's a much better look, a Hall of Famer as opposed to a NFL journeyman that played for pretty much every single team you can name. So let's change that. Aaron Rodgers passing touchdowns. This is another record that I think is very breakable, maybe even more breakable. On a breakable scale, I would say completions is what I'm going to talk about next. I think completions is probably the most breakable. Then passing touchdowns, then yards. But yards and passing touchdowns are kind of, I guess, 2, 3, 2, both are 2. I think completions should be pretty breakable for Aaron Rodgers. Right now, completions is currently held by Brett Favre. So Rodgers' former teammate in Green Bay. Favre had 343 completions in 2008, his only season, as we all know, with the New York Jets, which ended poorly. They were 8-3 after that Tennessee win. He had the shoulder injury, didn't tell anybody. Jets finished 9-7, missed the playoffs. We all know what happened that year. Favre leaves, goes to Minnesota. So 343 completions in 2008. The closest to that is Ryan Fitzpatrick with 335 in 2015. So Fitzpatrick came 8 shy of beating Favre's completion record in 2015. So just 8 away from Fitzpatrick also owning the completion record in Jets history. Now, as for Rodgers, why I think this record is so breakable is number one, not a very high number, but number two, Rodgers has surpassed 340 plus completions in 12 of his 19 seasons, which is more than his years of having 4,000 plus yards and 30 plus touchdowns. Again, you remove the first 3 years of his career, and then you take away last year. That's about 15 seasons played. That's basically saying, okay, 15 years as a starter, 12 of those saw him have over 340 completions. In 2022, which was his last full season played, in what was kind of a down year for Aaron Rodgers, where the interceptions were up at 12. He only had 26 touchdowns. The yards were down. Even in that down year, Rodgers still completed 350 passes. And he was playing hurt. If he did that this year, that would be the record. That's why I think this record's probably most breakable. Again, even if their Jets rely heavily on run, I think you're still seeing a world where Rodgers is going to go out there. He's going to complete 350, probably upwards near that passes because, again, completion percentage-wise as well. He's completed 65.3% of his passes in his career. He's going to complete passes at a very high clip. This should be a record that's very breakable. And I will say this, if this record doesn't get broke, I think it could potentially mean that not having a down year, but maybe things aren't going as planned. Because let's be honest here, Rodgers has the last time Rodgers in a full season played wouldn't have beat this record, right? In a last time full season played, you would have to go all the way back to 2011 when he had 343, which would tie the record. Now, the last time he would be below the record was 2010 and 312 completions. So since that point, in his full seasons played, not counting 2013 where he only played 9 games, and in 2017 where he only played 7 games, and of course last year where he only played 1 game and didn't even complete a pass, unfortunately. Not even 1 game, 4 snaps. You go back and you look, you'd have to go all the way back to 2010 where he had less than 343 completions in a season. Or I apologize. Actually, 2014, 341. That's the last time. You'd have to go all the way back to 2014. We're in 2024. That's a decade ago. This is a guy that's consistently produced 350 plus completion seasons. I think you see that again this year. So completions, Aaron Rodgers as well. Now, moving on to some of the receiving numbers. These also are still kind of a carryover from the 2015 campaign where Brandon Marshall had a massive, massive season for the New York Jets. Receiving yards right now, and this is tough. I'll admit this won't be an easy record for Garrett Wilson to break. But it's a record that you have to keep an eye on, and it's a record that I definitely believe he can break this year, and that's receiving yards. So Brandon Marshall currently holds the record, 1,502 receiving yards. He did that in 2015. The closest to that is Don Maynard, who had 1,434 receiving yards. He did that in 1967, which, by the way, is super impressive. Over 1,400 receiving yards in the 1960s in an era where they didn't throw a ton is very, very impressive. That was Namath's year where he threw for 4,007 yards. That was the year prior to their 1968-1969 Super Bowl championship season in Super Bowl III. So very impressive numbers there from Don Maynard, obviously an all-time great. But Brandon Marshall holds the record with over 1,500 yards. So Garrett Wilson, as we know, is stud. Back-to-back 1,000-yard campaigns in 2022 and 2023. First player to do that since Keyshawn Johnson in 1998, 1999. We talk about it. He's had the worst quarterback play. He's had the worst quarterback play in football. And for him to still go out there and throw for or haul in over 1,000 yards in each of his first 2 seasons with the quarterback play and being a rookie where he was still, learning and stuff like that, being able to do that with the worst quarterback play, all that against him, he still went out there and had 2 massive, massive seasons. Now, what's tough about this is, 1,500 yards is a very high mark. That 2015 season by Brandon Marshall he ranked 4th in the NFL that year. So he was top 5 in the NFL that year in receiving yards. You go back and look at this past season, 2022. There was only 3 players in the NFL to hit over 1,500 yards. Those three players were Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So even some of the better receivers in football, names like Puka Nacua, of course, took off. A.J. Brown, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Jamar Chase. They didn't even hit it. So he's gonna have to be elite. You go back to a year prior, 2022, also only three receivers hit 1,500 plus yards. Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, and Devontae Adams hit it. You go back to 2021, you had three players as well only hit over 1,500 yards. Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams. So the common theme is Garrett Wilson's going to have to find a way. If he hits over 1,500 yards, he's going to have to find a way. He would be in that category of the Cooper Kupps, the Tyreek Hills of the world, the Justin Jeffersons of the world, the CeeDee Lambs, the Amon-Ra's of the world, the Devontae Adams of the world, like those elite receivers. 1,500 yards, when you look at it from an NFL perspective, is a very, very, very tough thing to do because only three receivers over the last 3 seasons. In each of the last 3 seasons, only 3 have done it. And I'm sure you can go back even further. But I have such high expectations for Garrett Wilson. I said it last year. I thought Garrett Wilson last year with Rodgers could go off for 1,500, 1,600 yards because I think Garrett Wilson's a guy that when all is said and done at the end of this year, at the end of next year, right, after maybe a year or two with Rodgers, I think he's going to be in that elite conversation of top 5, top 3 receiver in football, where he's up there with names like Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and those guys. That's how good I think Garrett Wilson is. I think every Jet fan would agree as well. That's how good he can be. And look, another thing too is in terms of receiving yards is like, and I'll say the same thing about this as well in receptions with another record I think could be broke. And that's like Rodgers is going to find a way to get Garrett Wilson the ball. While it's a very steep hill to climb, 1,500 yards is a lot. And I think probably realistic expectations for Garrett Wilson this year, well, he should have probably 1,300 to 1,400 yards. I think he should finish top 7, top 8 in the NFL this year in yards. That's probably realistic. Exceeding expectations would be 1,500, 1,600s, but still he'll be in that conversation. Like I said, this is a guy that had, this guy had 1,100 yards in 2022 with Zach Wilson. 1,100 yards. It's not crazy to say this guy can go off for 400 more yards with a Hall of Fame quarterback. You have to realize what he's had at quarterback. And I know that sounds crazy, 400 more yards, but it's the truth. How many times was Garrett Wilson left open in games and Simeon, Boyle, Zach, Flacco in 2022? I mean, how many, right? They didn't see him or they were already on the ground. Aaron Rodgers is going to see him. He left a lot of yards out there because of the quarterbacks. He's going to get a lot of those yards this year, and that's why I think it's definitely breakable. But also, Rodgers is going to find a way to get you the ball. He had 1,103 yards in 2022, 1,042 last year. If there was a young receiver in football right now that could break into that elite category of top 5 receivers in football and be one of 3 or 4 players to surpass 1,500 yards, it's Garrett Wilson with Aaron Rodgers. And I'll leave it at that. So receiving yards is another record that could be broken. Now, receptions, I will say this will probably be the most breakable record. On this entire list, it's the most breakable record. Brandon Marshall had 109 receptions in 2015. That currently stands. He had 173 targets that year. Now, number 2 is Garrett Wilson, who had 95 receptions in 2023. So Garrett Wilson through 2 seasons has 83 receptions in 2022, 95 receptions last year. So a total of 178 receptions in his first 2 seasons. And the reason I think this is so breakable, well, he was only 14 off. He was only 14 receptions off from beating Brandon Marshall last year or tying him last year. That's number 1. Number 2, similar to my yards argument, Rodgers is going to find a way to get you the ball. You look at Devontae Adams' best seasons in Green Bay, right? And I pulled this up earlier today before I came on here to do the pod. Devontae Adams has surpassed 1,000 yards in 3 seasons while I was in Green Bay. A lot of that was, health and stuff. There was a couple seasons where he would have surpassed 1,000 yards if he played the full year. But in 3 years in Green Bay, there was 3 seasons in Green Bay where he had over 1,000 yards. In those 3 years, 2018, he had 1,386 yards. He had 111 receptions. That would beat Brandon Marshall's record. 2021, he had 115 receptions and 1,374 yards. That would beat Brandon Marshall's record. 2020, that was rather. 2021, 123 receptions, 1,553 yards. That would also break Brandon Marshall's record. The point I'm trying to make here is that those years of 1,300, and 1,500 yards, Garrett Wilson's going to have a stat line like that this season. Just what I got done talking about. And the way Davante Adams got that was 111 receptions, which would break the record. 115 receptions, break the record. 123 receptions, break the record. Rodgers going to find a way to get him the ball. Garrett Wilson will probably end up this year having 100, let's say 16 receptions, 1,300, 1,400, let's say yards to be more realistic. Maybe he surpasses 1,500 yards like I just said. But that's like a realistic stat line. Because I think the Davante Adams production that he had in Green Bay, that's kind of what you have to expect out of Garrett Wilson. And in Davante Adams' best season, he would have broken Brandon Marshall's record. And that's kind of the baseline for what Garrett Wilson could do. If Rodgers likes you, if you're his number one guy, you're going to get the ball. And Garrett Wilson's his number one guy. He's a stud. He's going to get the ball. There's no other way to put it. And I'll say this. If Garrett Wilson has under 100 receptions or doesn't break this record, I think that could mean something's off. He may be, it could mean something's off because there really isn't any reason that this record, especially the amount of times that Garrett Wilson was running wide open this year where that won't be the case anymore. He should break this record pretty easily. And if you're looking at what Davante Adams did, he would have broke the record pretty easily. And I think that's kind of a baseline for what Garrett Wilson can do this year as well. So receptions is another number. I think this probably is the most breakable record with 109. Garrett Wilson's just the guy that can rack up receptions. We saw 95 last year. That was pretty darn close with the worst quarterback play. Garrett Wilson could find him the ball at least 15 more times. Rodgers can find Garrett Wilson the ball about 15 more times. So I think that's pretty breakable. So those are the main records. Now I'll get to wins here in a second because I do think wins is interesting, which is really all that matters. Rushing, I know some people will ask about rushing. I could potentially see, Breece obviously going to have a huge year. We all know that. I mean, he's a stud. The thing, Curtis Martin's 2004 season was nuts. He had 1,600 yards. He almost had 1,700 yards that year. I don't think Breece will break that. I don't think Breece is going to go off for 1,700 rushing yards or even 1,600 rushing yards. Curtis Martin actually holds the 3. 2004, 2001, 1999. All of those are the first 3 in Jets history. I could see Breece hitting, 1,200, 1,300 yards potentially on the ground where he's up near Christian McCaffrey, where Christian McCaffrey had 1,400 yards last year. Now, total yards, I could see Breece breaking a total yards record in Jets history where, because he's a better receiver than Curtis Martin was. He's more involved in a receiving game than Curtis Martin was. Curtis Martin was obviously dominant as a runner. I think Breece provides more as a passing game, which is where I could see him breaking like a total yards record. But I don't see Breece breaking Curtis Martin's single season rushing record. But again, I could see him breaking a total yards record from a receiving and a rushing standpoint total, because you saw last year he was second in the NFL. He was only behind Christian McCaffrey in total yards. That's how good Breece Hall was last year. So I could see that again this season. And then defensively, tackles, I guess for a minor thing, you could see potentially tackles, but I think that's something that is Jonathan Vilma has that record, 128. Mosley had 103 last year. Quincy Williams had 95. Maybe tackles, but that's not a huge thing. You look at interceptions. I don't see this is from more of like a defense perspective. These are more records that I'm mentioning now that I don't really see happening. Interceptions. Daynard Paulson of 1964 holds the record. He had 12 interceptions that year in 14 games. The most recent player, Ty Law, had 10 in 2005. That was the closest. I don't see any Jet really coming close to that. I could see this year with the Jets playing, of course, late in games, playing with a lead, forcing quarterbacks to throw, and then you have safeties and stuff like that run underneath it, and more opportunity for interceptions. I could see that, but I don't see somebody hauling in 12 picks this year. And then from a sacks perspective, Mark Gastineau still holds the record, obviously, the sack exchange. Actually, Gastineau holds the first 3 in Jets history. Now, I could see Hassan Reddick. I will say this about this sack record. I could see Hassan Reddick breaking into the top, at least top 5 in Jets history from a sack record standpoint. Because Gastineau, he holds the record at 22 sacks in 1984. I don't think anybody will break that on the Jets. And I know Quinn Williams, he holds the 7th spot with 12 in 2022. I know Reddick, obviously, his career high was 16. He can easily go off for 16 sacks this year. I don't think he'll hit 22. I don't think anybody will hit 22. That's just a crazy, crazy number. But I could see Reddick hitting top 3. Mark Gastineau holds the first 3 spots. Number 3 is 13.5 sacks. I could see Reddick breaking that. I could see at the end of this year, Reddick being 3rd all time in a single season Jets sack record. He had 11 last year. I could see him going off for 14 this year. He's had 16 in 2022 as well. This guy that's 4th most sacks in the last 4 seasons. Been up there with some, he's an elite pass rusher, gets to the quarterback. I could see him getting over 13.5 sacks, which was put him at 3rd, but I don't see anybody actually breaking the record. So from a defensive perspective, don't really see anybody breaking the 12 interceptions record. Definitely don't see anybody breaking 22 sacks. That's nothing against these guys. Quinn Williams, Hassan Reddick, those guys can eat, but 22 sacks is nuts. It's up there in history. So we'll see. But that I just don't. Offensively, I think is more towards the records. Part of the reason too is defensively the statistics are a little bit more impressive. Offensively, it's a little bit of a lower bar. That's just kind of how things have rolled. Now, wins is interesting because in terms of the Jets' highest winning percentage and best season, well, that came in 1960 and 1969 when they won Super Bowl III. They went 11-3 that year. Now, back then, of course, they played 14 games, and they had a 786 winning percentage. So that, in terms of winning percentage, was actually their best season. However, the Jets' most wins in a season, which is what is really important to this discussion, was 12-4 in 1998. Now, that was the only year. The Jets only had 1 year of hitting 12 wins. That was the 1998 team that, of course, lost to the Broncos in the title game. We all know how that ended. Testaverde year, all that. Parcells, one of the best teams. Still, many believe the most talented team in Jets history. And many have compared the 2024 team to that team in terms of talent. And that's why I bring it up. They went 12-4. That was a 750 winning percentage. That was the most wins they've ever had in a season and the second best winning percentage they've ever had in a season. Since that point, nobody has really come close. The 2010 team, of course, came a little bit closer, but and of course 2015's up there with 10-6. They're not very close to 12-4, but I think they're somewhere within the top 20, I believe. Recently there hasn't really been much seasons that have challenged that. The Jets have only hit 12 wins once, and I found this number interesting, kind of sad a little bit. Since 1960, when the Jets came into existence as an AFL franchise, the New York Titans, which they started out as, they've only surpassed 10 wins in 11 times. So they have been around since 1960, and they've only hit 11 wins, or 10 wins 11 times. And they've only hit 12 once, which is just crazy. And I'll be honest, I haven't looked around and looked at like what other franchises, how many times they've hit. Like, for example, the Chiefs recently, or even the Cowboys in the 90s plus, they've been able to hit. Their great regular season team can't get it done in the postseason. I haven't looked at what those franchises, or even the Steelers, some of the great franchises in terms of winning, but 10 wins in 11 seasons, 10 wins 11 times since 1960 is just flat out sad. It just seems so sad. So in terms of this season, 1998 was the only team to hit 12 wins. 2024, if there was a team to do it, if not now, when? If there was a team to do it, it would be the 2024 team. This team, I think, has the best chance to go 12-5 or 13-4. I have them at 11-6. I'll probably have them at 12-5 by the end of camp, but I'm all optimistic. Realistically, I think they go 11-6. But look, this is a team that with their defense, with their offense, you look at them on paper, they'll go into every game with a chance to win. And that's all you can ask for. And I think 11-6, 12-5 is where a lot of people are at. But maybe you find a way to hit that 13th win. Maybe you find a way you have a massive season, win 13 games, get a first round bye, and this team exceeds everybody's expectations. But if there was a team to do it, it would be this team to surpass that 12-win marker. But we'll see. I mean, I think the good chance this team at least ties 12 wins. Maybe they surpass it. So wins is a number to keep an eye out as well. So those are the main ones. Leave a comment down below if you have any others. I looked through pretty much every single statistic. Some of them are kind of boring, like some of completion percentage, stuff like that. Didn't really feel the need to get into all that. More so completions, passing yards, passing touchdowns. Wanted to get into receiving yards, wanted to get into receptions, wanted to get into wins. And then defensively, I don't see any of those happening. I don't see sacks happening. 22, that's not going to happen. 12 interceptions, that's not going to happen. The Jets haven't really been a huge interception team. While I think they'll have more interceptions this year because quarterbacks late in games are going to have to pass and are going to make mistakes, and it's going to force the Jets to pick more balls off. They've never been a big interception team recently, so kind of roll with that. But that's what I've got. Leave a comment down below. What are your thoughts? I'll also leave the link to my article that I wrote as well, where I went a little bit more in depth as well on there, breaking down these records that I think could be broken. And before we close it out, once again, head on over to Huga House, proud partner of the show. Use promo code BUBS for 15% off your purchase at checkout. You want to get the hat that Aaron Rodgers wears, or you want to get the hat that I'm rocking right now, head on over to Huga House. Link in the description down below. Use promo code BUBS for 15% off your purchase. Help support the pod, help support Huga House, and of course, get yourself some of the swag that I'm rocking and some of the swag that you see QB1 rocking in Aaron Rodgers. So stay tuned. A lot more content coming your way. As always, hope you enjoyed it. And until then, JETS, 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 Jets.